بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So tonight inshallah we're going to complete the masail of an extra action in salah from where we left off last time. So the next mas'ala they speak about is an increase in salah. So we're done with an increase in salah from the actions in salah, right? We've covered most of it. There's one chapter or one group of masail they mention, and that is correcting the imam when the imam has made this mistake. Usually it's a mistake of an increase, at times a decrease. So that's going to happen in the next lesson inshallah. But the last category of increase is an increase when it comes to increase of actions. It's an increase of actions in the salah from actions that are outside of the salah. So the fuqaha say وَعَمَلٌ فِي الصَّلَاةِ متوال مستكثر عادة من غير جنس الصلاة كالمشي واللبس ولف العمامة يبطلها عمد وسهو. So they basically say that if a person does actions from outside of the salah, there has to be 3 or 4 things that should be found. If these 3 or 4 that we're going to mention are found in this action that the person is doing, then the salah would be invalid. If one of these few things are not found in this extra action the person is doing, the salah would not be invalid. The salah would not be invalid. So they say the action must be it must be one after the other. It must be one after the other. Meaning there must not be a pause or a break in between them. What does that mean? An example of a break between them, we're going to mention it now. So number 1, it must be one after the other. So that means a person, for example, he picks up something and then he puts his hand in his pocket, and then he takes out his phone, then he puts his phone on the floor, then he fixes his scarf, and then he opens his button. These things now, they've become one after the other. He didn't, for example, put his phone in his pocket, then continued in salah, and then he did something else. No. This was one after the other, one after the other. Right? That must be the first thing. مستكثر عادة من غير جنس الصلاة. So we'll say, number 2, these actions that a person is doing one after the other, the Hanbali fuqaha do not say it must be like 3 movements. They don't say it must be 5 movements or 3 movements or 1 movement. They say it must be in general, that people in general would deem this person to be doing many movements. So some can phrase it as if, they phrase it like, if somebody else were to see this person, because of the amount of movement he's doing, they would not think he's in salah. They would not think he's in salah. So that's number 2. The second stipulation. We can call it second or third, which means the first one, it must be one after the other, right? One group, number 1. Number 2, it must be a lot that people in general would deem a lot. People in general would deem a lot, right? As we said, you could phrase it that people, if they were to see, a good few people were to see this person, they would deem the person as if he's not in salah. And number 3, this thing which he's doing, these movements that he's doing, they are not from actions or movements in salah. So they are outside of the salah. So for example, fixing your scarf or taking out your phone or opening your button or scratching, these are all movements in salah that are not from movements in salah. They're not from the movements in salah. We spoke about the movements in salah being 4. So now, when a person does this type of movement, the salah becomes invalid. The salah becomes invalid. So therefore, if a person were to, for example, he were to fix his scarf in salah, what would the rule be? Exactly the same thing. Exactly as we mentioned. If it is many movements that people would deem a lot, and he's busy with his scarf one after the other. He didn't do his scarf a little bit, and then moments later he came back to it. No, it was one after the other, one after the other. And then obviously the third stipulation is it not being from the actions of salah, and obviously fixing a scarf or a hat or putting your hand in a pocket or scratching, they're not from actions in salah. So they say mutawali meaning one after the other. So in Al-Angari, in his Hashiyah, he mentions that what would separate the movements would just be like reciting one verse or one posture of salah, like ruku' or getting up from ruku' or something like that. So if a person were to, for example, open his button, And then he recites Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Then he puts his hand in his pocket. Then he recites, then he takes something out of his pocket. Then he says Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And then he takes off his watch, for example. Then he recites Maliki Yawmuddin. He puts his watch on his other hand. All of these movements, yes, it's becoming many. They're not from the actions of salah. It might be deemed many, like what is he doing? But are they one after the other? The answer is no. The answer is no, because he separated them with a verse or two. So therefore, that would break that small gap of verse or two or one posture in salah. It would break the sequence. It would break the sequence, and therefore the salah would not be broken. The salah would not be broken. They say يُبْطِلُهَا عَمْدُهُ وَسَهْوُهُ وَجَهْلُهُ إِن لَمْ تَكُنْ ضَرُورَةً. They say that these movements, it will break the salah unless it's a necessity. Because necessity means, when there's necessity, the structure of the salah, it's okay for the structure of the salah to be a bit mixed and bent. And they say because, for example, the salah of a person in fear, he won't be performing the normal salah. There's a lot of extra movements. There's the whole army moving back and forth, etc. The salah will all be valid. So when there's a real need to do something, then even if it's a lot of movements, and the one after the other, all 3 or 4 stipulations that we mentioned, then the salah would not be valid. They say يُبْطِلُهَا عَمْدُهُ وَسَهْوُهُ. They say a person, if he did those movements intentionally or unintentionally, the salah would be invalid. Intentionally, it's obvious. It's obvious why. These are not from actions of salah. It opposes the structure of the salah. But why, even if a person does so, they say سَهْوُهُ وَجَهْلُهُ. They say if a person does it ignorantly of the rule or ignorantly of the fact is in salah. Ignorantly of the rule or ignorantly of the fact is in salah, or forgetfully. Forgetting that he's in salah. Forgetting that he's in salah. Even if you were to say forgetting the rule, the outcome is the same. The outcome is the same. Why do they include ignorance and forgetfulness? They say because this has to do with ahkaam al-wad'eeyah. Ahkaam al-wad'eeyah. Ahkaam al-wad'eeyah means the rules that are wad'eeyah. So you get 2 types. You get ahkaam taklifiyah and ahkaam wad'eeyah. So ahkaam taklifiyah, they are the rules of something being wajib, something being fardh, something being sunnah, mustahab, mubah, makrooh, haram, etc. That's your taklifi. And then wad'i, they are another set of rules. This has to do whether you're going to deem something valid or invalid, or certain stipulations that need to be found in an ibadah or in an action or transaction. Those are separate category. Sometimes these categories can merge into something. Like for example, a person could perform salah with something haram on him. So you'd say the salah is valid. He's done all the postures of salah correctly. He's done all the pillars of salah. He's covered his awrah. He's facing the qibla, etc. But because, for example, he has a hat that has silk in it for a male, then you'd say it's not permissible for him to wear that. So that would be haram, but the salah would be valid. The salah would be valid because he's wearing a hat. It's not on his awrah. So now the ahkam of taklifiyah and wad'eeyah came together. So the wad'eeyah, it has to do with, as we said, sihha and fasad, like something being valid or invalid. So when it comes to these things, when it affects like the validity or the invalidity of something, the fuqaha say the qaaidah is in general, because there are exceptions. But in general, if this has to do with a hukum wad'i, like validity or invalidity, there's no difference between a person doing it intentionally or unintentionally, or forgetfully, or knowingly or unknowingly. So there's no difference. That's why in this case they're going to say the salah would be invalid. And if you were to give a couple of examples, if a person were, let's say his phone were to ring in salah, then he takes out his phone to switch it off. So that would be a movement from outside the salah. Would it be one after the other? Most likely he's pulled his phone out and then he's clicked the button or he's tapped the screen. So it would be one after the other, but would it be a lot? The answer is no. It could be a lot if he's taking his phone out and then it's in a pouch and he has to open this and open that and then click this and click that, then it could be a lot, but in general it won't be. So that's an example. And that's why the fuqaha say, we'll come to it now, but for example another mas'ala, if a person is in the salah and in the row in front of him there's a gap. Can he walk into that row? Or 2 rows in front of him there's a gap. Can he walk? The same rules would apply. Meaning if there were many steps that somebody were to see him, they say this man is walking. This person is walking in the salah. He's not in salah and there's many steps and they're one after the other. He didn't walk 2 steps and then pause, recite or whatever, and then walk again, and then recite, then walk again. No, this was one after the other. Would invalidate. If he broke any one of those 3 or 4 stipulations, we can count them as 3 or 4, whether we're going to say mustakthirun aada is 1 thing or 2 things, meaning many the action done, there's many actions that people would deem in general, people would deem it that he's basically outside of salah, whether we deem them separate or 1, that would differentiate whether we say 3 stipulations or 4. So this person, if he walks a little bit and then stops, breaks the sequence and then walks, then the salah will be valid. And if he didn't, then salah could be invalid. So like that we look at the mas'ala. That's why they say the movements that do not break the salah are those that resemble the movements of Rasoolullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed holding his granddaughter. So he held her, he put her down, he held her again. So this is a bit of action, holding her, putting her down, but they would not be one after the other, because he held her and then he put her down and he'd go into ruku' and sajdah, and then he'd pick her up again. So it would not be, whether it's a lot in the first place is a question, but were they one after the other, the answer would be no. The answer would be no. And then, for example, a person were to scratch themselves, same rule would apply, same rule would apply. So if a person were to open a door in salah, same rule would apply, because if a person is in the salah and the door is just near, he can just open it. Would it break the salah? No. Salah will not be broken unless those few stipulations are there. And like that the rule goes. And like that the rule goes. So they say if there's no need to do an action, then it's makrooh. Then it's makrooh. And if there's a need, then it's not makrooh. Because the qaaidah is al-haja tarfa'u al-karaha. That if something is makrooh, then if there's a need, then you do this thing and the fact it's makrooh goes away. So that's the qaaidah. Then do you do sajdah sahu for this movement? Either it's a movement for a need which is mubah, or it's a movement without a need that is makrooh. And we began in our first lesson saying that sajdah sahu for mubah is not done and sajdah sahu for makrooh is not done. Therefore in this case you'd not do sajdah sahu. So then before we mention our last masail connected to eating and drinking in salah, eating and drinking will fall into 16 categories, so it might take some time. No, I'm joking, we'll summarize them. They mention وَلَا تَبْطُلْ بِعَمَلِ قَلْبٍ وَإِطَالَةِ نَظَرٍ إِلَى شَيْءٍ وَتَقَدَّمْ. So they say that if a person were to spend a lot of time in salah looking at something, the salah would not be invalid. The salah would not be invalid, and we mentioned it in our opening dars. Even if a person were to read that thing, it would not be invalid. Imam Ahmed did it as well. Therefore, if a person, for example, took his phone out and then he looked at the screen and he read what's on the screen, would the salah be valid or not? The answer is that it would be valid if it wasn't many actions. But the fact he read something in his mind, it doesn't affect. Even if a person were to just daydream, so he stopped his recitation, he's daydreaming, and even if it was for a long period of time, the salah would be valid. Therefore, it could be a question some would ask that what's the ruling on silence in salah? Because some of the fuqaha, like the Hanafi madhab, say if a person is like just silent for like the length of 3 tasbihat, the salah would be invalid. So the Hanbali madhab, the way they phrase it, and we'll come to it nicer in a better manner when we mention after sajdah sahu the pillars in salah, then the way they phrase the masail, it would indicate that a person pausing in salah, it would not invalidate the salah. That's why they say amalu qalbin. Amalu qalbin means a person was just to think and daydream, it would not invalidate the salah. Or read something even if it took a period of time. So he recited Surah Al-Fatiha before he began the surah. He recited the surah before going to ruku', he was reading something on his phone. It doesn't invalidate the salah. Of course, this mas'ala is different to reciting from the mushaf. There is a different mas'ala, we spoke about it in the masail of Taraweeh. The last mas'ala with regards to an action, and that is, it connects to speaking and an action. But we mention it here. And that is, a person, we're going to mention the rules of speaking in salah in the upcoming lessons. But now, a speaking person, if he were to indicate in salah, like we're going to mention, a person can reply to salam with an indication. He can reply to salam with an indication. Or a person could indicate to somebody with his hands, like stop or wait or whatever it may be. Or if the imam is in salah and the people behind, he wants to tell them to get up or to sit down, like the question that Sheikh Umar had, how does the imam, he stood up for an extra rak'ah in Taraweeh, how would he tell the people behind to sit down? So we mentioned a few things, we can mention it in details again in the future, But a person could indicate as well. A person could indicate with his hand like get up or sit down. That would count as a movement. That would count as a movement. It won't count as speech. Speech is what he articulates. But let's say a person were dumb. A person were dumb. So the person spoke with sign language. A person spoke with sign language. This person, if he showed sign language in his salah, what would the rule be? Would it fall under speaking in salah, therefore invalidating? Or would it fall under doing an action in salah, therefore falling under the rules we just mentioned, meaning it must repeat and many times, etc.? What would the rule be there? So the fuqaha say that this dumb person, if he were to show sign language in salah, they say even if it were understood, this would count as action, not as speech. This would count as action, not as speech. So the next mas'ala they speak about is eating and drinking in salah. They fall into, we could say, 16 categories. And if we want, we can put it to 24 categories. But essentially, the last 8, to make it 24, the same rule goes for the second batch, 9 to 16. So we can call it 16, we can call it 24. The result is 1. The result is 1. So therefore, we're going to say that it would divide into categories. Okay, eating, let's say eating or drinking, but let's just use eating now. Eating would be either in salah, obviously in salah, but it would either be in fardh salah or either be nafil salah. It would either be intentional or unintentional, and it would either be a lot or a little. It will either be a lot or a little. So if we include all of that, that becomes 8 categories. And then you double that with drinking, so it becomes 16. So it's eating and drinking. So you have eating in the fardh salah or nafil salah, eating intentionally or unintentionally, eating a lot or a little, and then that's 6. There's a couple others. So we have eating in salah, as we said, intentional or unintentional, a lot or a little, and then in fardh or nafil. So essentially, there will be 4 categories. Fardh, nafil would become 8. Those 4 categories, they either happen in fardh or in nafil, they become 8. So that means intentional or unintentional, a lot or a little. That's 4. So if you put them in the fardh salah, becomes fardh and nafil. Fardh and nafil, that becomes 8. That becomes 8. And then the same thing with drinking. The same thing with drinking. So that gives us 2. That gives us 16. That gives us 16. Then some ulama say if a person eats or drinks in salah ignorantly. So that's another category where we can build the same ones, and it will take us to 16. It will take us to 24. But ignorantly and forgetfully takes 1 rule. Ignorantly and forgetfully takes 1 rule. So we have then 16 categories. Most of these will break the salah. So essentially, what we're going to say is in the fardh salah, if a person eats or drinks intentionally, then the fardh salah will be broken. If a person eats or drinks intentionally, the salah will be broken. So eating refers to something that has like a body or particle. So it's called, in Arabic, you say a jirm. You can say jirm or jurm. Some say afsah, some say it's more eloquent to say jirm. So you have that which has a particle, and drink is that which is liquid. A drink is that which is liquid. And when we say fardh salah, they say of the normal fardh salah that we know, the 5 fardh salah, and it's from the way the fuqaha phrase it, that would include a salah that a person took a vow for. A person took a vow for, and also a salah that's fardh kifai. Salah that's fardh kifai, as we mentioned for the Eid salah, it's fardh kifai. So the rule would apply there. The rest of the salah would take the rule of a nafil salah. So then in these fardh salah, if you eat intentionally, a lot or a little, the salah will be broken. The salah will be broken. If you eat for a lot forgetfully, when I say forgetfully, it includes ignorantly. If you eat a lot forgetfully or ignorantly, the fardh salah will be broken. And if you eat a little forgetfully, then the fardh salah will not be broken. So it's like that. So therefore, every time you eat in the fardh salah, it will break the fardh salah. Except if you ate a little forgetfully. The rest of the times the fardh salah will be broken. And when we say a little or a lot in these masail, it refers to, again, we're going to say the urf. Because a number of the fuqaha, like Ibn al-Banna and others, Ibn Qudama, Ibn al-Banna, they say if you do not have an amount specified in the shari'ah, you look at if there's something to indicate a length, what we're speaking about, or an amount of this of the specific thing we're speaking about in Arabic. If we don't have in the shari'ah hasn't stipulated a time or an amount, and we don't have a description in the Arabic language for how long this thing, whatever the topic is, would count as a long time or short time, or an amount that would be a lot or a little, then you look at the general custom of the people. So if a person were to, for example, eat like a bite of something big, they might say this person is eating. But a small thing that a person swallowed, something small that a person swallowed, they might say, people would not say that he's eaten anything. So that would count as, if he did it forgetfully, the salah would be valid. The salah would be valid, okay? So basically, as we said, eating in salah, in every case, it would break the salah, except if it's nafil salah and it is a little and forgetful. If it's fardh or nafil, but it's a little and forgetfully. A little and forgetfully, that's the only case where the salah would not break through eating. Drinking, if a person drinks in the fardh salah and it's intentional, the salah will break. The salah will break, right? If a person drinks forgetfully and it's a lot, the salah will break, fardh or nafil. If a person drinks a little bit forgetfully, his salah will be valid. His salah will be valid. The same as we said for eating. And if a person drinks a little bit intentionally in the fardh salah, in the nafil salah, a person drinks a little bit intentionally in the nafil salah, meaning in the non-fardh salah, then that is permissible. That is permissible. That is permissible, and this is only found in the Hanbali madhab. This mas'ala is called from the mufradat. It's only found in the Hanbali madhab. So therefore, drinking as well, it would break the salah in most cases, except if it is done forgetfully and it is a little in the fardh salah or the nafil salah, or done intentionally and it is a little bit in the nafil salah. Okay. So with that, we've covered eating and drinking in summary. So when we say drinking, we said it's a liquid. We said it is a liquid. And therefore, would that mean could in theory include water, it can include soft drinks, it can include juice, it can include milk, etc. So all of these would be included as a start. But some ulama indicate to specific examples that I've mentioned here based on the other masail we're going to mention. So then what they mention in the book, that the salah وتبطل الصلاة بيسير أكل وشرب جهلا وسهوا لعموم عفية لأمتي عن الخطأ والنسيان. They say, to read it from the book just to confirm what we mentioned, they say the salah breaks with a little eating or drinking forgetfully or ignorantly, right? Because Rasoolullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, my ummah, the actions that they do forgetfully or by mistake has been overlooked. It's been overlooked. So what did we say? We said a little eating or drinking, forgetfully or unintentionally. The salah would not break. The salah would not break, as we just mentioned. And that, therefore, they say, minhu, and based on that we know that the salah would break if a person ate or drank a lot. Urfan, according to the custom of the people. So they say a lot, which includes fardh and nafil salah, unintentionally or intentionally, as we mentioned. And then they say, وَلَا يَبْطُلُ نَفْلٌ بِيَسِيرِ شُرْبٍ عَمْدًا. They say that nafil salah would not break with drinking a little bit intentionally. And the reason for this is one opinion in the madhab. The second opinion in the madhab is that nafil salah will break, just like fardh salah. They say the nafil salah will break like the fardh salah. And there's actually a third opinion. Some of the Hanbali fuqaha say that even a little eating intentionally in the nafil salah would not break the nafil salah. A little eating intentionally in the nafil salah would not break the nafil salah. But the relied upon position of the madhab is that a little drinking intentionally in the nafil salah would not break the nafil salah. And they say because nafil salah at times it can be long. So a person might want to quench his thirst. He might get thirsty and want to drink something. So they allow it. And more than that, it's been narrated from a few of the Salaf, amongst them Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa in Mecca, he drank while he was in Nafil Salah. He drank while he was in Nafil Salah. So that is one of the main and strongest proofs. One of the main and strongest proofs. Therefore, if a person ate or drank forgetfully, in a case where if he did it intentionally, it would break the Salah. If a person ate or drank forgetfully, in a case where if he did it intentionally, it will break the Salah, that means Sajdah Sahu becomes wajibah. So that's the qaaidah. As we mentioned, that if you do it intentionally, it will break the Salah. If a person did it forgetfully, then Sajdah Sahu becomes wajibah. Therefore, if a person drank intentionally in the Nafil Salah, then there would not be a need for Sajdah Sahu. There would not be a need for Sajdah Sahu. But if a person ate or drank forgetfully a little bit in the fardh Salah, then you have to do Sajdah Sahu. Because if a person did that intentionally, it will break the Salah. And if a person drank or ate a lot by mistake in the fardh Salah, then there would be no need for Sajdah Sahu, because the Salah would be broken. And then another mas'ala that they mentioned that, for example, if a person were to be praying outside and he opened his mouth and it was raining and water came to his mouth. So they mention it, however it happened, water fell into the person's mouth and then he swallowed it. What would the rule be? The rule be that it would take the exact rule as what we mentioned for drinking. Exactly what we mentioned for drinking, for the fardh Salah and the Nafil Salah, for intentional, for unintentional, for a lot, for a little, we apply the same rules here. Then they say, وَبَلْعُ ذُوبٍ سُكَّرٍ وَنَحْوِهِ بِفَمٍ كَأَكْلٍ. Then they mention that to swallow something that dissolves, or to swallow something sugary that dissolves, then this thing is in the mouth, it would count as eating. Therefore, what does that mean? That means certain things you can suck on and it will dissolve. Like you have certain types of sweets, or you have like chewing gum, or you have certain medicine that you would keep on your tongue or under your tongue, and then you suck on it and then it dissolves. These things would take the rule of eating. In Salah. Exactly as we mentioned just now, when is it overlooked and not overlooked, and a lot or a little, it will be the exact same thing. So then that tells us that, for example, if we take chewing gum, chewing gum has two situations. When you first put it in your mouth and you chew it, there it has sugar, the sugar of the gum that you're going to swallow. But if you chew and chew and chew, then it gets tasteless. And there's nothing dissolves further. There's no sugar in it left. You're just chewing it. So therefore, the first stage of a chewing gum, if it's in your mouth and you chew it and you swallow, then that would break the Salah, because that's eating. If you did it intentionally. If you did it unintentionally, and it's a little bit that went down your throats, you have to do Sajdah Sahu. But then if you have gum in your mouth, that's already kind of been in your mouth for a long time, so it's old. There's no taste in it left. So if you were to chew and you'd suck nothing basically in your saliva, then this would not break the Salah if you were to swallow the result of it. It would not break the Salah. But it's in your mouth. Or if you have anything in your mouth. I can't give an example of a sweet because that's also going to have sugar. If you swallow it, it's going to have the same rule that we mentioned for eating. But let's say you had a stone in your mouth or something, or even gum that we mentioned that you've not chewed. They speak on a mas'ala of that. They say if you leave something, a particle of food in your mouth, they say ثُمَّ لَأَكَهُ or ثُمَّ لَأَكَهَا. They say if this loq happened. So what is loq? Loq means, there's a few meanings to it in Arabic, and that is, for example, if you were to chew on this thing, or you were to move it around in your mouth, or you were to suck on it, they say this would count as a movement in Salah. So exactly what we mentioned for movement in Salah in the last lesson of being a lot, of being one after the other, and what's the last one? Okay, obviously it's not from the actions of Salah, then in that case it would break the Salah. But if you just had it in your mouth, you moved it once or twice, or even if you moved it many times but not immediately one after the other, there was a space of time as you moved the gum or whatever you had in your mouth, then that would not break the salah. It would be makrooh, as we mentioned, for the actions, when there's no need to do an action, but there's no sajdah sahu. So that would be the rule on that. And now that we mentioned this mas'ala of swallowing something that is sugary, then what we mentioned just now with regards to things, liquids that you drink in the salah, then those that have sugar in it, those that have the same effects or the same resemblance to sugary things, like you have juices for example, they have sugar in them, then it would take the rule of what we just mentioned now, in the sense that you can't drink that. You can't drink that. Okay? So when we say drinking in salah, it doesn't mean just random drinking. So who pointed out this mas'ala is Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin rahmatullahi alayh, and he said based on this, them mentioning this mas'ala of swallowing something that dissolves while it's in your mouth, they say this would take the role of eating. He says based on that you cannot then drink juices and things like that have kind of sugary substance in them. Our last point for this mas'ala, and that is the fuqaha speak about if a person has some food particles remaining in his mouth, anywhere in his mouth, under his tongue, in between his teeth, and then a person were to swallow that, what would the rule be on that? Here the fuqaha say if a person swallows some particle in his mouth, and this thing is small in the sense that it would flow with his saliva, that he doesn't have such a big particle that you can feel it on its own. If you were to swallow it with your saliva, it's very difficult to locate and notice this particle in your mouth itself. Then this, if you swallow it, then the salah would not break. It's overlooked because it's a small amount that's difficult to avoid. It's a small amount that's difficult to avoid. You just swallowed it, it's in your mouth, you can't really feel it, the salah would be valid. And that is what he says in Al-Iqna'. But actually in Al-Muntaha, which is the other madhab, main book of the madhab that we mentioned, they say even if you can feel the particle, but it's small, but you can feel it, meaning it flows with your spit, but it's not so small, it's a bit bigger. Then in that case, they say it's also overlooked. The madhab is that it must not flow with, it must flow with your spit. So it's not that big. It's very small. It flows with your spit. And then connected to that, some of the fuqaha phrase it in another manner, and they say that if this is something in your mouth that it's relatively easy to remove, and you swallowed that, then that would break the salah. But would it just break the salah? The answer is not actually, because it has to do with what we mentioned regarding eating. Because a small amount of eating forgetfully or ignorantly of the situation that you're in salah, ignorantly of the rule, then in that case it will be overlooked. Therefore, if a person had something in his mouth and he kept it there and without realizing he swallowed it, that would count as a small amount of eating. It would not break the salah. Yes, you have to do sajdah sahu because it's a big amount, it's a decent amount. If it's a small amount, then it flowed with your saliva, then there's no issues at all. There's no sajdah sahu either. So for example, if a person bites their nails in salah, the nail is something small. It will flow with your spit. So that's overlooked. Assuming it were big, then on the second opinion in the madhab, it would also be overlooked. And then also if a person swallowed it without realizing, because somebody out of habit might bite his nails and might swallow, if he swallows it normally, he might not even realize. So then that would be eating, assuming it is a big, but it's most likely not going to be, then the rule would be as if he ate something forgetfully. So he mentioned just to mention these masail and how they connect to, and for examples, basically would it be applied to eating or drinking and what would be there. That's why we said eating is something that has a particle and drinking is something that has a liquid. Even though we linked the sugary to the mas'ala of them saying a person eating something that dissolves, that takes the ruling of eating. So it's just important to remember that. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to teach us that which benefits us and benefit us with that which He teaches us. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.